The silence in room 312 was a physical weight. It was the sterile, humming silence of machines that measured a life but couldn't explain it. For 3 days, Ethan Hayes had sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, his world compressed into the four pale walls, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, and the still form of his wife in the bed. Her name was Clara. He had to remind himself of that sometimes, not because he'd forgotten, but because the woman lying there, a constellation of bruises on her pale skin and a blankness in her eyes, felt like a stranger. When she woke, it wasn't with a cinematic gasp or a flood of recognition. It was a slow, confused flutter of eyelids. Her gaze, a familiar shade of hazel, drifted over him without a flicker of knowing. He had called her name, his voice cracking with a desperate hope that felt like swallowing sand. She had just stared, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to a language she didn't understand. "Now, doctor." Lena Hansen stood at the foot of the bed, her expression a careful blend of compassion and clinical distance. "It's called retrograde amnesia, Ethan. The trauma to the prefrontal cortex has, well, it's like a library where all the books have been wiped clean. We don't know if the text will ever return." "So, what do I do?" Ethan asked, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "How do I help her?" "Surround her with familiarity, doctor," Hansen said, her voice gentle. "Photographs, music she loved, smells, objects. The brain is a remarkable thing. Sometimes a sensory key can unlock a door. Don't push her. Just create the world she knew, and let her find her own way back into it." Create the world she knew. The phrase echoed in his mind as he drove their sensible sedan back to the two-story colonial in Oak Park they had called home. Their life. It was a good life, a perfect life. He was a successful architect. She, the brilliant and passionate owner of a chic downtown art gallery. They had a beautiful home, a shared love for old jazz records, and a comfortable rhythm built over 12 years of marriage. He would bring her home, and the scent of the lemon verbena she planted by the door, the feel of the worn Persian rug in the living room, the sight of their wedding photo on the mantelpiece. It would all come back. It had to. He let himself into the quiet house. It felt wrong without her presence, like a stage set after the play has ended. He walked through the rooms, touching the spines of her books, running his fingers over the smooth surface of her piano. He was on a mission, a scavenger hunt for her soul. In the bedroom, he opened her closet. The scent of her perfume, a subtle mix of sandalwood and jasmine, hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment, he had to steady himself against the doorframe. He gathered a few of her favorite silk blouses, a worn copy of her favorite novel, and the small silver locket he'd given her on their 5th anniversary. Then he remembered. Her lipstick, a specific shade called Crimson Kiss. She never left the house without it, calling it her armor. She'd swipe it on with a defiant little smile, a final touch that declared she was ready to face the world. It would be in her purse, the one she'd had with her in the car. The police had returned her personal effects in a sterile plastic bag. He found it on the kitchen counter where he'd dropped it, a designer leather bag that now looked tragically out of place. His hands trembled slightly as he unzipped it. The familiar clutter of a life was inside. A wallet, a tin of mints, a tangle of keys. His fingers brushed past them, searching for the cool metallic tube of lipstick. Instead, they hit a stiff piece of cardstock tucked into an inner pocket. Curious, he pulled it out. It was a plane ticket, an e-ticket, printed on flimsy paper. His eyes scanned the details, his mind slow to process the information. His passenger, Hayes, Clara. From Chicago, Ord. To Buenos Aires, AZ. Flight, AA95. One departure, 2:45 p.m. He glanced at the date printed in bold. It was for last Tuesday, the day of the accident. The crash had happened at noon. The flight was scheduled to depart less than 3 hours later. His breath caught in his throat. He read the ticket again, his gaze snagging on 2 words that seemed to burn a hole in the paper, in his carefully constructed reality. Ticket type one way. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene, and Ethan felt like the sole, unwitting detective. The plane ticket sat on the granite countertop, a white rectangle of betrayal in the warm, inviting kitchen they had designed together. Buenos Aires. One way. The words were a discordant shriek in the quiet symphony of their life. He had spent the last hour pacing, the ticket a hot coal in his hand, his mind a frantic reel of denial and confusion. A business trip? No, she would have told him. A surprise for them both? Then why just one ticket, in her name only? Every explanation he concocted fell apart under the stark, undeniable fact of it. She was leaving him. Leaving this life he thought they had both cherished. The realization didn't land like a blow. It seeped into him like a slow-acting poison, chilling him from the inside out. The woman he'd been mourning, the wife he was desperately trying to bring back, had been trying to escape him. He moved from the kitchen to the study, a room paneled in dark cherry wood that had always felt like the heart of their home. Now it felt like a stranger's office. He ran his hand over her leather-bound planner. It was filled with her elegant, looping script. Lunch with gallery patron, confirm shipment from artist, dentist, 3 p.m. It was a portrait of a busy, normal life. There was no mention of Argentina, no hint of a secret plan. His gaze fell on her laptop, a sleek silver machine sitting closed on the corner of the desk. She was meticulous about her privacy, but this was no longer about privacy. This was about survival. His survival. He needed to understand the lie he'd been living. He opened it. The screen lit up, displaying a serene photo of a beach at sunset they'd taken on their last vacation. It asked for a password. He typed in their anniversary, 0624. Access denied. He tried her birthday, his birthday, the dog's name they'd never gotten. Nothing. Each red warning felt like another locked door in a house he no longer recognized. He slumped in her chair, the scent of her perfume lingering on the leather. Frustration and grief warred within him. He felt a surge of anger, a one-way ticket. She was just going to disappear? He stared at the screen, an idea, bitter and ironic, forming in his mind. He typed in the date of their anniversary, but in reverse, 4260. The computer chimed softly and unlocked. The symbolism was a gut punch, an upside-down backward version of their life. Her desktop was neat, folders organized by project and date. He clicked through emails first. Most were mundane, related to her gallery. But then he noticed the sheer volume of them from a single sender. Marcus Thorne. The name was vaguely familiar. Clara had mentioned him once as a key investor in her gallery expansion. The early emails were professional, full of financial jargon about profit margins and quarterly returns. But as he scrolled down through the months, the tone began to change. Clara, the numbers from last quarter are concerning. We need to see a significant improvement. This is not the return on investment I was promised. Let's schedule a meeting. My office. Thursday. The politeness frayed, giving way to an ugly impatience. Your excuses are wearing thin. I am not a patient man. The final email, sent the day before the crash, was stripped of all pretense. You know what you owe me. This isn't a game. You have 48 hours to make this right. After that, I can't be responsible for what happens. A cold dread washed over Ethan. This was more than a business dispute. This was a threat. He minimized the email window, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scanned her desktop again, his eyes landing on a folder tucked away in a corner, named simply MISC. He clicked it. Inside was a single password-protected spreadsheet. He tried the reversed anniversary date again. It opened. The screen filled with a second set of financial records for the gallery. It wasn't the neat, optimistic accounting she showed him. This was a bloodbath of red ink. Column after column detailed staggering losses, loans, and expenditures he couldn't comprehend. He scrolled to the bottom line, a figure so large it seemed impossible. A debt of over $500,000. Owed, according to a note in the final cell, to Monsieur Thorne. She wasn't just leaving him, she was fleeing. The perfect life he had been trying to restore for her was a meticulously crafted lie. A beautiful facade built over a foundation of terrifying debt and secrets. And now, he was standing alone in the ruins. The next visit to the hospital was a performance. Ethan arranged the photos on Clara's bedside table, played a soft Miles Davis album from his phone, and spoke in the calm, reassuring tones of a devoted husband. But every word felt like a lie. He looked at her placid, empty face and saw not just a victim of a tragic accident, but a stranger who had been living a double life. The chasm between the woman he thought he knew and the woman who had bought a one-way ticket to Argentina felt impossibly wide. "I brought your favorite book," he said, holding up the worn paperback. She took it, her fingers tracing the faded cover. "Did I like it?" she asked, her voice a soft, curious whisper. The question was so innocent, so genuine, that it broke his heart all over again. "You loved it," he said, the words catching in his throat. "You said it was about starting over." He left before the fraudulent calm he had constructed could shatter. The drive home was a blur of gray highway and heavier gray thoughts. He was no longer just a grieving husband. He was the inheritor of a life he didn't understand and a danger he couldn't yet measure. Who was Marcus Thorne? What kind of man writes emails that sound like a countdown to violence? He pulled into his driveway, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The perfect suburban picture felt like a mockery. As he stepped out of his car, he noticed it. A sleek, black luxury sedan parked at the curb. It was the kind of car that didn't belong on their quiet, tree-lined street. It exuded a silent, predatory power. A man was standing on his porch. He was in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan's first car. His hair was silver at the temples, his face handsome in a sharp, unforgiving way. He stood with a relaxed posture that was anything but. As Ethan approached, the man offered a smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. "Ethan Hayes?" the man asked, his voice smooth and deep. He didn't extend a hand. "Yes. Can I help you?" Ethan's hand tightened on his car keys, his knuckles white. "Marcus Thorne," the man said, as if introducing a celebrity. "I was a business partner of your wife's. I heard about the terrible accident. I wanted to come by and offer my condolences in person." Thorne. The name hit Ethan like a physical shock. He felt the blood drain from his face. This was him. The man from the emails, the source of the $500,000 debt, standing on his porch. "That's considerate of you," Ethan managed, his voice tight. "It's a difficult time." "Of course," Thorne said, his gaze sweeping over the house, taking in the neat landscaping, the solid oak door. It was the look of an appraiser, calculating value. Clara was a woman of great ambition, a real eye for talent. But perhaps her business acumen wasn't quite as sharp. She had a tendency to overextend. Every polite word was a carefully aimed dart. Thorne was testing him, trying to see what he knew. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't reveal his discovery of the secret ledger or the ticket. He had no leverage, no power. He was just a husband in a quiet suburb. "The gallery was her passion," Ethan said, keeping his voice level. "She poured everything into it." "She certainly did," Thorne agreed, his smile tightening. "She poured a great deal into it. My great deal, in fact. An investment, you understand. Deal into it. One I was expecting a significant return on." The pretense of a condolence call evaporated, leaving a chillingly direct message in its place. Her accident, tragic as it is, doesn't simply erase that obligation. Ethan's jaw clenched. "I don't know the details of her business arrangements." "I think you'll want to learn them." Quickly, Thorne said. He took a step closer, invading Ethan's personal space. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. "People who owe me money have a habit of finding trouble. It's an unfortunate correlation." He glanced down the street towards the main road. "It's a dangerous road out there. So many careless drivers." He looked back at Ethan, his eyes glinting like chips of ice. It would be a shame for lightning to strike twice. The threat hung in the air, as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. Then, as quickly as he had arrived, Thorne turned and walked back to his sedan. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud, and the car purred away, leaving Ethan standing alone on his porch, the quiet afternoon suddenly filled with a terrifying, unspoken violence. The threat lingered long after the black sedan disappeared. It clung to the air in the house, a toxic residue that made every familiar object seem menacing. Thorne's words, "It would be a shame for lightning to strike twice," were not a warning. They were a promise. Ethan's life had been fractured by the discovery of Clara's secret, but now it was actively in danger. The abstract fear of betrayal was replaced by the visceral, gut-churning terror of a man who could orchestrate a car crash and then show up on your porch to offer condolences. He didn't sleep. He spent the night staring at the ceiling. The numbers from Clara's hidden spreadsheet burned into his memory. $500,000. It was a sum so vast it felt like a fiction. But Thorne's cold eyes had made it terrifyingly real. Protecting Clara was no longer about coaxing back memories of their happy life. It was about shielding her, this new, fragile version of her, from a wolf who was circling, waiting. The next morning, driven by a desperate, primal instinct to protect, he acted. He went to their bank, the one where he and Clara had smilingly opened their first joint account a decade ago. He sat across from a bewildered financial advisor and began the systematic dismantling of their future. He cashed out the stock portfolio they'd been nurturing for retirement, taking a painful loss. He emptied their savings account, the money earmarked for a trip to Italy. He drained every last cent they had, every dollar that represented a shared dream or a moment of careful planning. The numbers on the withdrawal slips felt like pieces of his life being carved away. The final amount was a little over $50,000. It was a pittance against the full debt, but it was all he had. He called the number Thorne had left on a business card on his porch rail. A crisp, professional voice answered. Ethan, his own voice hoarse, said he needed to speak with Marcus Thorne about Clara Hayes. He was told to be at the 5th level of a downtown parking garage at 4 p.m. and to come alone. The parking garage was a soulless concrete maze, smelling of exhaust fumes and dampness. Ethan drove his sedan up the spiraling ramps, the duffel bag full of cash sitting on the passenger seat like a bomb. He parked in the designated spot and waited, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. A few minutes later, Thorne's black sedan slid silently into the space opposite him. Thorne got out, looking as immaculate as he had on the porch. He was alone. He gestured for Ethan to get out. Ethan grabbed the duffel bag, its weight a poor substitute for the security it was meant to buy. "You're a punctual man, Ethan." "I appreciate that," Thorne said, his tone casual, as if they were meeting for a friendly lunch. Thorne said, "Here," Ethan said, his voice raw. He thrust the bag forward. "It's 50,000. It's everything we have. A show of good faith." Thorne didn't take the bag immediately. He looked at it, then back at Ethan, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. "Good faith," he repeated, savoring the words. He finally took the bag, unzipped it, and glanced inside without bothering to count the stacks of bills. He zipped it shut. "It's a nice start," he said, the words a dismissive flick of the wrist. "A down payment. On your wife's continued health." Ethan felt a surge of helpless rage. "I need assurances that this is over, that you'll leave us alone." Thorne laughed, a short, sharp bark that echoed in the concrete cavern. "Assurances? My dear man, you're in no position to demand anything. You are in a position to pay." He leaned against his car, the picture of relaxed power. "You know, the police are remarkably inept sometimes. Their report on your wife's accident, for instance. They concluded it was a single-car incident. Driver error. Lost control on a wet patch of road." He paused, letting the silence stretch, his cold eyes fixed on Ethan's. "But they missed the witness," Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. A nervous little man walking his dog. He saw a dark sedan, much like this one, bump your wife's car. Just a tap, really. Enough to send her spinning into that oak tree. By the time he got his wits about him, the sedan was gone. The air left Ethan's lungs. This was it. The confirmation. The accident was an attack. A deliberate, calculated act of violence. Thorne was confessing, flaunting his power, making it clear that he held their lives in his hands. The witness decided it was best not to get involved, Thorne finished, pushing himself off the car. Wise man. He understood that some things are just the cost of doing business. He tossed the duffel bag into his own car. You'll be in touch with the next installment. Don't make me wait too long. He got into his car and drove away, leaving Ethan standing in the echoing silence of the garage, the smell of gasoline thick in the air. The $50,000 hadn't bought him safety. It had only paid for the chilling revelation of just how deep the danger went. Clara was moved from the hospital to a quiet, sunlit rehabilitation facility in the suburbs. The move was supposed to represent progress, a step toward recovery. But for Ethan, it only deepened the sense of dislocation. He would visit her in a cheerful room with floral wallpaper and watch her struggle with the simplest tasks, tying her shoes, remembering the name of the nurse who had just left the room. Her long-term memory remained a vast, white emptiness. She knew his name was Ethan and that he was her husband, but these were facts she had learned, not memories she felt. He sat with her during her physical and occupational therapy sessions, a silent, anxious spectator. He saw flashes of the old Clara in the determined set of her jaw as she relearned how to hold a pen, but the spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by a constant, weary confusion. The life he was trying to protect felt more fragile than ever. The pressure from Thorne was a constant, low-grade hum of terror in the back of his mind. He sold Clara's car, then his own, lying to the facility staff that they were downsizing. He cashed in his 401k, ignoring the dire warnings about penalties. Every dollar he scraped together felt like feeding a beast that would never be satisfied. One afternoon, he was sitting with Clara in a common area overlooking a garden. She was listlessly flipping through a magazine, her brow furrowed in concentration. Outside, a dark gray delivery van pulled up to the curb. It was a perfectly ordinary event, but as Clara's eyes drifted to the window, her entire body went rigid. The magazine slipped from her fingers, scattering across the floor. Her breath hitched, coming in short, sharp gasps. Her eyes, wide with a terror that came from nowhere he could see, were locked on the van. Clara? What is it? See. What's wrong? Ethan asked, moving to her side, his hand on her arm. She flinched at his touch, pulling away. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. The shadow! The shadow! Her body began to shake uncontrollably. A nurse hurried over as Clara's panic escalated into a full-blown attack, her chest heaving as she fought for air. The nurse administered a mild sedative, and Clara's frantic energy slowly subsided, leaving her limp and exhausted in the chair. Later, after she was resting in her room, the nurse spoke to Ethan in the hallway. It's a trauma response. She might not remember the event, but the body remembers the fear. Something about that vehicle triggered it. The shadow. The phrase echoed in Ethan's mind, a chilling fragment from a past she couldn't access. He thought of Thorne's dark sedan. The witness. The deliberate tap that sent her spinning. The shadow wasn't a metaphor. It was real. It was Thorne. The next day, he found her sitting by the same window, looking out at the garden. She was calm again, the memory of her panic seemingly erased along with everything else. Ethan sat down opposite her, his heart a heavy knot in his chest. Doctor? Hansen had said not to push, but he was out of options. He was fighting a ghost in the dark, and Clara, unknowingly, held the only light. Clara, he began, his voice softer than he intended. Yesterday, you were upset. You said something about a shadow. She looked at him, her expression blank. I don't remember. I know, he said gently, but try. Before the accident, were you afraid of anything? Or anyone? He hated the words as they left his mouth, hated the way he was prodding at her fragile psyche. At the gallery, was there stress? Anyone who made you feel unsafe? He watched her face for any sign of recognition, any flicker. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, her brow creased. It wasn't a memory surfacing, but a reaction to him, to the desperate, hungry look in his eyes. The kind, patient man who brought her books and played her old music was gone. In his place was a man with a hard, urgent edge, A man who was asking her for something she couldn't give. Her lower lip began to tremble. Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remembered fear. They were tears of immediate present tense terror. She was afraid of him. "I don't know," she cried, her voice breaking. "I don't know what you want from me. Please stop looking at me like that." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. A nurse, hearing the commotion, appeared at the door and gave Ethan a sharp, disapproving look. She gently escorted him out of the room, leaving him to stand alone in the sterile hallway. He had crossed a line. In his desperate search for answers to save her, he was destroying the very person he was trying to protect. Standing in the hallway of the rehabilitation center, the sound of Clara's sobs still echoing in his ears, Ethan felt a profound and sickening sense of failure. He had made her afraid of him. He was becoming just another shadow in her fractured world. The realization was a turning point. Pushing Clara was a dead end. It was cruel and useless. If there were answers, they weren't in her broken mind. They were somewhere in the life she had left behind. That night, he drove into the city. The art gallery, Gallery Hayes, was located in a trendy, high-rent district. It was dark now, the large display window empty, a temporarily closed sign taped to the inside of the glass door. It looked like a tomb. He parked a block away and walked back. The emergency key Clara kept on her ring, feeling heavy and illicit in his palm. Letting himself in felt like a transgression. The air inside was still and smelled of turpentine and dust. Moonlight filtered through the high windows, illuminating sculptures shrouded in white cloths, making them look like a collection of ghosts. Ethan switched on his phone's flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the darkness. This space, once so vibrant and full of her energy, was now just a silent, hollow shell. He made his way to her office at the back. It was exactly as she had left it. A stack of mail on the desk, a half-empty mug of coffee, a pen lying next to an open catalog. It was a scene frozen in time, from the last morning of her old life. He started searching, methodically at first, then with increasing urgency. He went through the file cabinets, finding only invoices, artist contracts, and insurance forms, the public face of the business. He checked every drawer, rifled through every folder. Nothing. Nothing that explained the secret debt or the true nature of her relationship with Thorne. He was about to give up, the weight of another dead end pressing down on him, when his flashlight beam caught an odd seam in the paneling of her heavy oak desk. He ran his fingers over it. It was a false panel, cleverly designed. His heart began to pound. Using the edge of a letter opener, he pried it open. Inside the small hidden compartment was a single object, a small leather-bound ledger, the kind used for private accounts. He took it out, his hands shaking. He opened it to the first page. The entries were in Clara's neat script, but the content was chilling. It wasn't just a record of debt. It was a detailed coded log of cash transactions, offshore account numbers, and dates. It was a money laundering diary. Names were listed next to sums of money that made his blood run cold. And at the top of every page, the same initial, M.T. Marcus Thorne. Clara wasn't just his debtor, she was his bookkeeper, his accomplice, and, judging by the final entries, a series of question marks and notes about inconsistencies, she had been on the verge of either confronting him or exposing him. The one-way ticket wasn't just about escaping debt. It was about escaping a man she knew was a dangerous criminal. She was a witness. Just as this horrifying realization solidified, he heard a sound that froze him in place, the distinct scrape of a key in the gallery's front door lock. Panic seized him. He snapped his flashlight off, plunging the office into near-total darkness. The ledger felt like a block of ice in his hand. There was nowhere to run. The only way out was through the main gallery. He scrambled out from behind the desk and dove behind a large, sheet-covered abstract metal sculpture, tucking himself into the shadows. The front door opened, and two figures stepped inside. He couldn't see them clearly, but he could hear their low voices. They didn't turn on the lights, using their own flashlights to sweep across the shrouded room. "He said to check her office again," one of them grumbled. "Make sure she didn't leave anything behind. Especially the book." What book? The other asked. The one she kept for him. The private one. Thorne's freaking out that she might have stashed it somewhere. Ethan held his breath, his muscles screaming with tension. The ledger in his hand felt like it was radiating heat. The beams of their flashlights sliced through the darkness, getting closer. One beam swept over his hiding place, lingering for a heart-stopping second on the white sheet just inches from his face, before moving on. They entered the office. He could hear them opening drawers, the sound of papers being shuffled impatiently. "Nothing here," the first voice said after a minute. "Place is clean, let's go." Ethan stayed perfectly still, listening as their footsteps receded. The front door clicked shut. He waited, counting to 100 in the suffocating silence, before he dared to move. He scrambled to his feet, clutching the ledger to his chest. He didn't use his light. He stumbled through the dark, ghostly gallery, fumbled with the lock on the front door, and slipped out into the cold night air, his heart hammering as if it would break through his ribs. He had the truth in his hands, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that it was the one thing Marcus Thorne would kill to get back. The leather ledger sat on his passenger seat, a small dark object that had completely rewritten the past and now held the key to any possible future. Driving through the sleeping city, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity amidst the terror. The narrative had shifted. Clara wasn't a deceitful wife running from debt. She was a woman trapped in a criminal enterprise who had made a desperate, last-ditch attempt to escape. She had been trying to fix a catastrophic mistake. The car crash wasn't just an attack meant to intimidate. It was likely an attempted murder meant to silence her for good. He now held the power to destroy Marcus Thorne. The ledger was a meticulous record of his crimes, undeniable proof that would put him away for years. With this, Ethan could finally end the threats, the fear, the relentless pressure. But a choice loomed, sharp and complex. He could go to Thorne, use the ledger as a bargaining chip, trade the book for their freedom, for the cancellation of the debt, for a guarantee that Thorne would disappear from their lives forever. It was the quickest, most direct path to safety. But it meant bargaining with a man who had tried to kill his wife. It meant letting a criminal walk free. The alternative was to trust the system, to take the ledger to the police. This was the path of justice, but it was fraught with its own dangers. It would trigger a massive investigation. Clara, as the gallery owner, and the one who kept the books, would be implicated. With her amnesia, she couldn't defend herself, couldn't explain the coercion and fear that surely led her to this point. He could be trading Thorne's cage for one of her own. He drove for hours, circling the city, the two paths warring in his mind. By dawn, as the first gray light began to silhouette the Chicago skyline, he knew what he had to do. Trusting Thorne was impossible. The man was a snake. Any deal he made would be temporary, a stay of execution, not a pardon. The only way to truly be free was to remove him from the board entirely. He had to trust that the truth, Clara's role as a victim forced into complicity, would come out. He found the downtown headquarters of the Chicago Police Department. He walked in, the ledger tucked inside his jacket, and asked to speak to someone in the Financial Crimes Unit. He was led to a small, cluttered office where a tired-looking detective with weary eyes named Costello listened to his story. Ethan laid it all out: the amnesia, the ticket, the threats, and finally, the ledger. He watched Costello's expression shift from professional skepticism to intense focus as he flipped through the pages. "You stay reachable," Costello said, his voice grim, when Ethan had finished. "Don't go home. Don't go to the rehab facility. Get a hotel. We'll be in touch." Leaving the station, Ethan felt as though he had just lit the fuse on a bomb, not knowing if he was far enough away to survive the blast. He followed the detective's instructions and checked into an anonymous hotel near the airport. But there was one more thing he had to do. He couldn't let Clara hear about this on the news. He needed to see her. He called the facility and, posing as her brother, learned that visiting hours were still open. He drove there, his nerves frayed. He found her in her room, sketching in a notepad. She looked up when he entered, her expression neutral, the fear from their last encounter seemingly forgotten. He pulled a chair close to her bed. He didn't have the photos or the music this time, He only had the truth, or a version of it she could bear. "Clara," he began, his voice quiet and steady, "I need to tell you something about the woman you were." She put down her pencil, her attention fully on him. "She was strong," he said, meeting her gaze. "And she was very brave. But she got into trouble. She made a serious mistake and got involved with a very bad man. He hurt her. He's the reason for the accident." He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not memory, but understanding. The pieces of her fragmented fear, the shadow, were beginning to find a context. "She was trying to fix it," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She was trying to get away and make things right when she got hurt. I found the proof of what he did. I gave it to people who can stop him. It's over now, Clara. The danger is gone." He reached out and took her hand. It was cool in his. "I know I've been trying to bring the old you back. I've been trying to make you remember our life. I was wrong to do that. It's too much pressure. It's not fair to you." He squeezed her hand gently. "We don't have to find our way back to what we were. We can start from here, if you want to." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were slow, quiet tears of relief. The constant, exhausting effort to be someone she couldn't remember was finally lifted. For the first time, she looked at him not as a kind, but demanding stranger from a forgotten past, but as a man offering her a future, an anchor in her confusing present. She squeezed his hand back, a small, simple gesture that spoke more than 1,000 recovered memories. It was an answer. It was a beginning. 6 months later, the autumn leaves were skittering across the pavement in Lincoln Park. The chill in the air was a clean, sharp promise of winter, a welcome change from the suffocating heat of the summer they had endured. Ethan watched as a news report played on the muted television in a coffee shop window. The headlines scrolled across the bottom. "Marcus Thorne, sentenced to 25 years in federal prison." The image showed Thorne, no longer immaculate in a tailored suit, but haggard and grim-faced in a prison jumpsuit, being led from a courthouse. The ledger had been undeniable. Coupled with testimony from others Thorne had victimized, the case was airtight. Clara had been granted full immunity, her amnesia and the evidence of coercion painting a clear picture of her as a witness, not a conspirator. The legal storm was over. The personal one had just begun to calm. They had sold the house in Oak Park. It was too big, too full of ghosts of a life that no longer existed. The sale, along with the liquidation of the gallery's assets, had paid off the last of the legitimate business debts. They moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the park, a place with no shared history, a blank canvas. Clara's memory of her life before the accident never returned. The doctor said it likely never would. It was a door that had been permanently sealed. But her short-term memory, her ability to learn and form new connections, had healed remarkably. She was no longer the frightened, confused woman from the rehab center. She was quiet, observant, and possessed a gentle curiosity about the world, and about him. Their life together became a strange and tender courtship. He would tell her stories about their past, not as lessons for her to memorize, but as stories about two people he used to know. He told her how they met in a crowded bookstore, how she had laughed at his terrible jokes on their first date, how he had proposed on a rainy Tuesday because he simply couldn't wait any longer. She listened to these stories with a fond detachment, as if hearing about beloved characters in a novel. In turn, she was discovering herself. She found she didn't like jazz music, but loved classical guitar. She had no head for business, but a remarkable talent for botanical drawing. She was building a new person, brick by brick, from the ground up. And Ethan found himself falling in love with this new person, this quiet, resilient woman who met every day with a cautious but open heart. They were walking by the lagoon now, their gloved hands linked. It was a comfortable, easy silence. In the distance, a plane ascended from O'Hare, a silver sliver climbing into the vast blue sky. Ethan watched it, the memory of the one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, a dull, distant ache. "Do you ever wonder?" he asked softly. "About her? The woman you were before?" Clara followed his gaze to the plane, her expression thoughtful. She was silent for a long moment, watching it until it was just a glint of light. Then she turned to him, and her eyes were clear, completely free of the shadows that had haunted her for so long. I used to, she admitted. I used to feel like I was missing a part of my soul. I felt guilty that I couldn't give you back your wife. She paused, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. It was a smile he was coming to cherish more than any memory. But I don't need to remember who I was for him, she said, nodding slightly towards the sky, a quiet acknowledgement of the life she had tried to flee. Or even who I was for you back then. She tightened her grip on his hand, her gaze locking with his. I just need to know who I am with you, right now. In that moment, the last of the grief for the life he had lost finally dissolved. The past was a closed book. The woman he had married was gone, and the man he had been had vanished with her. But here, walking in the crisp autumn air, was something new, something real, something they had chosen. They turned away from the water and walked on together, their future an unwritten page.